When we're going through some kind of a tough time, it can be easy for us to panic. If you're anything like me, the old story of Chicken Little, who cried out, "The sky is falling," is not only a cute story or fable, but it can all too often be a very present reality. Now, it is true that there are some people who seem to thrive in crisis situations, and it's also true that there are some people who can appear to be very calm on the surface while underneath their insides are churning. But in times of collective difficulty, or times of great loss, or times of deep conflict and mistrust that can prevent people from working together to address common challenges. Not that we know anything about times like those, but when we're in times like those, it can be pretty easy for our so-called primitive brains to take over, for the part of our brains that specialize in fight or flight or freeze to take the wheel, and for us to panic and to lose access to our deepest and best thinking. Now, this is another one of those areas where the Christian faith has very practical applications. One of the things that we learn from the scriptures is that God's Holy Spirit dwells in us. Do you not know that you are God's temple and that God's Spirit dwells in you? Paul writes in 1 Corinthians chapter 3. When I heard that text growing up, I mainly heard it as a way to keep young people from using drugs, because that would harm God's temple. Now, while not using drugs is very important advice, I do not think that is all that this verse has to teach us. God's Holy Spirit, the Spirit of wisdom, the Spirit of creativity, the Spirit of compassion and gentleness and deliverance and holiness and truth and power and love, that same Spirit dwells in you. The very same Spirit that hovered over the waters of creation, the very same Spirit that poured out onto Jesus at the time of his baptism, the very same Spirit that poured out onto the early church on the day of Pentecost, that same Spirit dwells in you. Let that sink in for a moment. When you're finding yourself in the midst of a conflict, or a scary situation, or a health crisis, or some great, great loss, the Holy Spirit is still dwelling in you. And if you can just quiet down the anxious parts in you that can get activated really easily and that can very easily distract you, if you can quiet those down, you always have access to the Holy Spirit who dwells in you. And as Jesus says in John chapter 16, the Spirit is always ready to lead you into all truth. Now, it is important for us to know that when Paul says the Holy Spirit dwells in you, the word you is actually plural. So that Paul is saying God's Spirit dwells in y'all, which means that we should not take this verse in any hyper-individualistic way to mean that I've got the Spirit and no one else does. It means that when we are going through a difficult time as a group, whenever we're going through some kind of challenge together as a group or a congregation, or by extension even a larger community, when we're doing that together, God's Holy Spirit dwells within us and among us as a community and is available to help us see our way through. Friends, be safe, be well, And may you come to believe at a deeper and deeper level that the Holy Spirit of God dwells in you and is always available to guide you and to lead you in every situation of your life. We'll see you soon.